content warning for the episode ahead. We will be discussing things such as depression, trauma, grief, homophobia, as well as transphobia, and a very brief mention of anti-Semitism. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Queerly, a podcast where we discuss LGBTQ plus related media and general topics such as mental health and any interesting or hot topic media related topics. So Liz still out of the country, as said in the previous episode I posted today. So this one is just going to be a continuation of the discussion I started in the last one. So major spoiler warnings for The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2. If you haven't played the first game, it's been almost a decade now that it's been out, so please go play that. It's really good. I think that general consensus is it's one of the best games of all time, especially narrative-wise. Part 2, I'm personally a fan of. I really, really enjoy it, but I know that it's a controversial game, so that's more of to each their own. So, I mean, I encourage going and trying it at the very least. And so let's dive right back into it then. If you have any issues with any of the content warnings I gave at the beginning, please tune off. We're gonna kind of get deep into it. So where to begin? I guess we'll start with the first game as well as its DLC, Left Behind, since that's kind of where we actually got the confirmation that Ellie was lesbian. So first game itself, it was really well received, and thing with games like that, within that actual game, there's nothing that would be of actual direct offense when it comes to people who are homophobic. Ellie, yeah, she's a scrappy young teen, but there's no specific dialogue or things linked to any queer behavior or beliefs when it comes to her. And then there's no real discussion of it within the game. And it being a third-person shooter definitely leads to a certain crowd, and I don't mean to generalize. I really enjoy third-person shooters and FPSs, but there is a certain crowd that it draws, who typically are more, well, first of all, male gaze-centric when it comes to female characters, as well as more on the socially conservative side. And not saying all socially conservative people are homophobic. That's not what I'm saying at all. It tends to bring in a certain type of crowd that usually homophobic people fall under. That's all I'm saying. And so once Left Behind came out, so for those who haven't played that or played the first, so the first game is essentially a post-apocalypse. There's been the cordyceps virus, which is an actual virus that can affect ants. Look it up, it's actually kind of horrifying, but it has spread to humans in this world. And so this character Joel, who you play as, there's a lot of stuff. I don't want to fully, just in case people want to listen thinking they won't play it, I don't want to spoil everything, so I'm just going to do the general points I need to. So Joel, he needs to travel across the country with this girl Ellie, who it turns out is immune to being bitten. So being bitten is how the virus spreads. It also can spread through breathing. Well, no, it doesn't get spread through that. You just die from that. Never mind. Ignore me. So they travel across the country. They start in Boston, and they end up in, I believe it is Washington. No, not Washington. They end up in Montana. That's where they end up. And so throughout this journey, obviously, they start bonding. Now Joel, this spoiler I feel like kind of has to happen anyway. His daughter Sarah, you see die in the very beginning of the game, right when the apocalypse itself is beginning. And so he is very hesitant to get attached to Ellie because they're both the same age, essentially. One is around 13, 14, the other is 14. And so over the course of the story, the player and the character of Joel both become very attached to Ellie. And so the way that they wrote Ellie, so at the time I was actually Ellie's age. I mean, with both games, I guess I've been Ellie's age when they came out because that's how time works. But so I already got very attached to her as a character. Obviously, I also got attached to Joel and all the others. But she didn't, there was no, like, specific stuff pointing to her being gay. She was kind of scrappy, tomboyish kid, but a lot of people don't fully get that being a tomboy doesn't mean you're gay. Like, people don't always understand that coding doesn't, like things that you usually see with, like, gay coding, if someone actually practices that behavior in real life, that doesn't mean that they are gay or queer or trans or anything. So, I mean, she was just kind of more of a typical, like, 14-year-old, really. I know some people had some speculation at the time, but it wasn't really something that was discussed. And then I believe it was the following year that the DLC came out, so Left Behind. And so in that one, we meet a character named Riley, who she was Ellie's friend before they left Boston, so before meeting Joel and everything, before getting bitten as well. And it shows the events leading up to when she is bitten. As well as some events that happen in the first game, side by side, just for story parallels and everything. And so you see, you've heard mention of Riley in the base game, but it was just in reference to being bitten. And so in this DLC, you see them trying to reconnect because Riley had run off with a it's technically a terrorist group. It's basically a group trying to still search for a cure to the virus, and they come at odds with the military that is generally running all of these quarantine zones where most people live at this point. And so they are. I mean, they're two 14-year-old girls having fun running around a mall that they managed to power back up. And it's very sweet. It's very, like, it's really heartwarming. It's fun. And, like, after becoming attached to Ellie in the game, just seeing her having fun and being happy and like a kid is great. It really is. And so the vibe that they have between the two is very much, it is, like, kind of super close friend as a kid, but also always that inkling of something underneath, you know? And so it doesn't come as a surprise exactly, but it is very, not sudden, but it's very explicit and unapologetic when it comes to the showing that, confirming that both of them are gay. So they at one point are dancing around. They found a stereo that was working, and during this, it's very awkward. It's very awkward dancing, which is really funny and very accurate to when you're in your tween years and you're at, like, your middle school dance, and your arms are kind of too long proportionally at that, and you don't know what to do with them. So that's always fun. But they have some moments of just looking at each other, saying that because Riley was supposed to leave the next day essentially to go to the group she's with's headquarters, and those are all the way out in Wyoming. Either Wyoming or Montana. I'm kind of blanking right now. I believe it's Wyoming. But so she so Ellie basically tells Riley that she doesn't want her to go, and Riley then takes off her dog tags and declares that she's not gonna leave. And in that moment, they kind of like have a beat where they just stare at each other, and then Ellie goes in and kisses her, and it's very, very cute, and it makes me smile anytime I see it. And so, thing is, that audience that I'd previously mentioned, unfortunately, did not take it as well as I did, or many other people did. I think that with games like this, so usually you don't see quite this level of backlash with games when they depict characters like this. I think that the nature of the base game, it being a shooter, B kind of a like a general post-apocalyptic zombie gotta travel to a destination type thing. It's like Walking Dead. It reaches very wide audiences, and then I think just the quality of the storytelling in the first one also, it captured a lot of people's interest. And so with this DLC, you started seeing a lot of homophobic statements about it. People either, I remember at the time seeing things like either people denying, people in denial that like Ellie was gay, which was kind of weird, because it's in the DLC of the game. But and then you saw people, of course, going on about like, oh, it's SJW, left, like gay agenda, the liberals, all that kind of stuff. And like, even if you are one of those people who finds it, who finds that, or believes that liberal, I guess, quote unquote, agenda politically isn't to your taste, I have to hope that when it comes to just being able to even show somebody who is different from you living their life as a normal person is something that you can respect enough to not basically say you are poisoning the minds of our children and you should not do this, it should not exist. Because people don't understand how powerful representation really is. I mean, of course today corporations use it way too much for their for basically performative progressiveness. So all of those Disney's first gay blank, where it's, background character, half a second shot, that kind of stuff. And they say it like 10 times, it's their first one. But, and you see it with, it's Pride Month, so you see it with all of these companies selling Pride merch, even though, they fund all of these, or give money donations to all of these groups or politicians who don't support queer-friendly legislature. And so, at least when it comes to the non-corporate side of things, you mostly see people arguing that it is teaching young children about sex and shoving sex in their face. Now that is an argument that's existed for a very long time. It's an argument that you see a lot of people who very much support the Don't Say Gay bill say. And I mean, like, just think about that for a second. Like, it's like saying, teaching kids, or even just showing kids a picture of a woman and a man who are together, like, even just sitting down on a bench together, is basically telling, like, forcing, like, hardcore porn in their face. Like, seriously. Are you kidding me? Like, we exist outside of sex, too. We are not... Even other animals exist outside of sex itself, too, you know? I mean... What... How... Wouldn't... Like, we wouldn't have money to even have jobs if we just focused on sex all the time. It's just such a... It's one of those arguments where it's purely from upbringing and either cultural, religious, or social stereotypes. And so that, especially when it comes to portraying youths with who are queer, that argument comes flying in full force. So you saw that a lot with Ellie and Riley, saying that they're sexualizing young children and teens, which, once again, no. You can show a boy and a girl who are, like, I don't know, 8, kissing, and everyone just thinks it's cute. But, boy and boy who are 8, not so much, apparently. Or, a trans boy. Like, not so much. Or a trans girl. And so that was a huge factor in the backlash of the DLC. And so it's something that it quelled down pretty quickly just because it was a DLC. It was only a few hours of gameplay. And it wasn't, I guess it just wasn't, it really wasn't the same scale as the original game. And people, when it comes to things like DLC, a lot of the time people can hand wave off the content in it. I mean, I know I've done that for certain games where, like, it just, the content just isn't good writing quality. But with the second game, and especially when it started leaking, that was a major issue that was reported everywhere. And I do want to mention the anti-Semitism real quick, that the game's director, one of them, the previous one had him, and I believe it is, I'm forgetting his name, but it had him co-directing with another person. For the second game, he was the main director, and then Haley Gross, I believe, was helping. But when Neil Druckmann, who is Israeli, or of Israeli descent, there was a lot of anti-Semitism thrown his way with these leaks. So I just wanted to mention that as well. But with the leaks, so what leaked was first, I'm not sure if it was leaked or if it was just art that was shown at a presentation or something. But the first thing was of the character Abby in Part 2. And so Abby, as discussed before, she is built like an ox. She is very, not unfeminine, but very non conventionally attractive in, I guess, I mean, it's like specifically like her torso area. Because of her working out a shit ton, essentially. She has a, like, relatively flat chest, which, if you build up your pec muscles like that, that happens. That's just how life works. And she's a sturdy person. It's not like she has a waist that curves in or anything like that. And so there were all these comments, like I discussed previously, about, oh, why did they put a woman's face on a man's body? Oh, this, and there was transphobia of people, and if you it's for a trigger warning, if you need it when it comes to transphobia, just skip ahead about 40 seconds. People saying, oh, why is there a tranny in this game? Which, knowing about Lev, who's later in the game, they they definitely got a shock to their system. But just even that assumption that she was trans, which in the game she's not. And it wouldn't have been wrong if she was. But just the assumption, because of a body type that was not considered conventionally attractive within the typical male gaze, is definitely, while it is somewhat tied to homophobia in a way, I'd say it's also tied to just general feminist issues and issues with men's views on women. And of course, like, by men, you know what I mean when I say men. I mean those specific ones holding those beliefs. Like, don't worry, y'all. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're probably on the same page, and if you're not, hopefully I'm able to at least get you thinking about the other side's arguments. But yeah, so that's with Abby, and then when the full game came, or no, when the trailer came out for the game. So, this is again going into spoilers for part 2. There was a trailer showing a scene in a barn at kind of like a winter dance or like small party. And so it goes through the whole scene, and it ends up with Dina and Ellie. Ellie is now about 20 years old, rather than 14. And it shows them kissing. Or at first they're dancing together, and then they end up kissing. And so that, there's gameplay afterwards, but that was definitely a big talking point. Now, of course, there were plenty of people who were very, like, happy for Ellie, were, like, very excited that this was happening, but there were also those same people who were spouting homophobic language and slurs and things like that. And I'm conflicted on how I feel about the whole situation, because on one hand, I am happy that the difference in terms of the amount of negative comments or negative views on on queer characters and queer interactions, I guess I could say, in that DLC versus in this game, which, mind you, is about 6 or 7 years after that was released, or closer to 6. That the ratio, there are fewer of those homophobic comments, but so that's kind of reassuring that progress is occurring, but it's also a little disheartening to see there's still such a volume of them. While the ratio might be better, the volume of it is still it can be horrible and makes you feel downtrodden, you know? And so I think it's really important to discuss media like this where it provokes such a reaction, because often it means that it is really, at least in this case, it is pretty well done, because this kind of media, if the surrounding parts of it are really good, it can still draw in people who may not hold the same opinions on queer people, but they will still experience the game and experience that viewpoint through playing as Ellie. And I think games are one of the most important ways to be able to put yourself in another's shoes. Now, of course, like, that same can be said for any type of media. That's really what it is. But with games, you are literally thrust into the character that you're playing. You are controlling them. Typically, either you are embodying them yourself, or they, I guess, embody you, or you essentially take on the almost protective role of controlling the character, trying to get them to where they need to go, making sure they're safe, making sure that everything's happening in a way that's beneficial to them, things like that. You're experiencing it as them, with them. And so I think that's such a powerful tool for kind of changing people's minds and hearts. And so I wanted to commend both part 1 and part 2 of The Last of Us for that. And I think that's essentially what they tried to do with the second half of part 2. So another spoiler for Last of Us part 2, the first half you play as Ellie, and then the second half you play as Abby. So Abby is the one who had killed Joel. And I know, again, this is a polarizing opinion. A lot of people don't like Abby and don't think that part of the game is well done. There are plenty of people who didn't finish the game. They just stopped playing as soon as it switched to her. And I know that for a while I had kind of a similar thing where I would replay the first half of the game and then just stop once it switched over to Abby's side of the story. But especially after playing in grounded mode, where I spent a lot of time as both characters, as well as kind of the feeling of self-preservation mixed with being this character and having to apply that preservation to them, I think definitely helped me to relate more and be more open to hearing out her side of the story. Because once I did, I kind of saw... Well, I mean, obviously they wrote it as kind of paralleling Ellie's story. But also I saw the way that Abby was written, and honestly, I think she's a really good character. I think her journey is really well done, and I think the ultimate ending, where I know a lot of people were dissatisfied, I think is really just powerful. And so purely by the game's own means, was it able to kind of sway me. It wasn't from some outside person's opinion. And so I hope that can occur with other people when it comes to things like more social issues, like queer issues, or even race issues, or mental health issues. I know that I had played Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which this isn't a spoiler because the whole game is centered around it, and it's the whole point of the game, is that the character is going through essentially a mental break and has schizophrenia, or some closely related version of it that could just be oh shit, what's the word? Not paranoia, but hold on. It's not just schizophrenia. There's another name for it that I just can't remember right now. But it's gonna bug me now. But basically, what it does is, with the audio, between the audio and the visuals, it tricks your brain the same way that having something like schizophrenia would trick your brain. You hear things that in the world of the game you wouldn't actually be hearing. You see things in the game that you wouldn't actually be seeing. And the way that information is laid out is very much in line with how things can become almost garbled when you experience things like trauma. And so I think that we are getting to a point where games are becoming more aware of their power when it comes to allowing people to open themselves up to others. And so, yeah, so games like this, I think, are extremely significant and should be taken with that in mind. And then I was gonna talk about something else. I did, so with Lev in Last of Us Part 2, I don't feel like I am qualified to give an opinion. I am not trans. I've known some trans people, but I can't speak for them. And obviously everyone has a different experience as well. So, I know there are some things about people being unhappy that, Lev's whole backstory was essentially explained by, his sister rather than him. And the use of, his dead name by some of the enemies in the game. The dead name, as somebody who only knows, like, from an outside perspective, the fact that it's used by enemies in the game who are meant to they basically serve a role as, among other things, a religious cult with anti-LGBTQ plus beliefs. And so I think that it makes sense for them to use it. I personally can't say whether or not it was right of them to use it, though. So, just wanted to address that, as well as why I didn't want to discuss that in as much length as the other stuff I've been talking about. But yeah, and I guess something I should talk about is the barn scene again. So in the actual game, again, spoilers, we see that after the kiss, a man named Sean, who lives in the town where Ellie and Dina are, basically I think the lines oh god, I feel weird, the ability to quote this stuff. The lines are essentially like, this is like a family event, there are children here, so again, doing the whole implying that any act that shows any level of queer affection, I suppose, is inappropriate, inherently sexual, and something that should be hidden. So kind of, I do wonder if that's a on part of the writers / developers to almost echo what was said about the DLC initially. But so he says that Dina and Ellie pay him no mind. They start walking away, and then he says, I believe these are the exact words. He says, "Just what this town needs, another loudmouth dyke." And so that leads to a whole confrontation, Joel coming in, all of that. And so I think that the fact that the existence of homophobia still exists is a good one. Like, because the game itself is supposed to take place only, I think the second game's only maybe 30 years since at max 30 years. I think it's closer to like 25 years after the apocalypse began. Of course, there's going to be more pressing matters, but then again, like today, when there are still more pressing matters, you still have people who focus on these issues. And so, I mean, of course, and like I get into conversations with people who are more either right-leaning or kind of fence-sitting about this, where they'd argue that, like, people in the queer community are trivializing people issues, or they're making bigger issues out of things like pronouns when it doesn't matter that much. We have all these other issues going on. And so to that I say, the thing is, yeah, there are other things going on, but in this case, most people who who are not respecting this stuff. I'd say majority of them. Now, of course, there are always exceptions, but majority of them, what their actual like concerns aren't about even those bigger things that we have to worry about. It's more of their whole focus. Their whole focus is on the fear and or hatred toward people within the queer community. So their own rhetoric they're not following essentially. So it's as always everything's complicated, but it is interesting being able to experience these things both as an outsider in terms of when you play a video game. You yourself are an outsider. You are not... I mean, VR changes things, but there hasn't yet been a VR game that really, really hits that boundary and the nail on the head. But you are both an outsider, but you are also experiencing with the character what they're going through. And so, again, it's important. I would hope that even just thinking about that would open up some people's eyes, minds, ears. I mean, it's... because, I mean, people don't understand what someone is going through, what someone deals with, until they actually begin to listen. They need to begin to listen in order for this type of progress to happen. And so, I think that, yeah, video games, like any other art form, should be taken seriously in the way that it can affect people engaging with it and the social culture around it. Gaming for a long time was very much a boys' club, a straight hetero boys' club, and cis boys' club. I bet that, yeah. I mean, like, because I grew up playing things like Call of Duty, and other games. I played games as a kid, and early and late 2000s, even like early 2010s, voice chat, that was a fun time. Never speaking out of fear of harassment, whether it be sexual harassment or just harassment for being a woman. So we've come. Oh, we have progressed. I've played a COD game since. I just don't even turn on voice chat, but we have progressed somewhat. I'm really hoping that we're able to continue this progress, and for games to continue using their medium and developing their medium in such a way that it really does affect those engaging with it to the same level. Because I don't know, I personally do engage to the same level, but again, it differs with different people. I enjoy really dark, intense media, so I end up usually getting really invested with it and engaging with it really thoroughly. But I know some people don't, whether it be with all media or things like games themselves purely. They may engage with movies or cinema, or some people engage with physical art in that way, 2D art, or animated things, 2D or 3D. But I think that the unique experience of games, they need to continue to develop it so that level of engagement that is typical with things like cinema and movies. You see all of these discussions. Yeah, there are discussions about games, but they aren't as... I mean, again, there are exceptions. There aren't as many that go so thoroughly into what a game is trying to say, or maybe even what it's inadvertently saying. And so I'm really hoping that games are able to reach that level where it is considered the same level of art, as well as the same level of effect on viewers, or players in this case, as art like media. Art like cinema, I mean. I think I've been just harping on this one point for like 7 minutes, so I'm gonna stop with that bit. And then I wanted to go on to the game itself. So this is less LGBTQ plus related. So if you only really want to listen to that, feel free to turn off. I totally get it. I mean, totally get it. So here's your thing. Here's your warning. Now I'm just going to go purely into the game itself and its storyline. And so I wanted to talk about for part 2, because part 1 I do want to discuss more with Liz. So I'm going to save that a little bit when it comes to discussing actually narrative. But part 2 I want to discuss because first, the whole message of, I know that a lot of people have basically felt that the game is too it brings up too much negative emotion, and they only feel that in it. And so I mean, that's completely valid. I can see where that's coming from. I, again, really like very dark, intense media. And I completely relate with the level of emotional intensity that the characters feel in it. I know that with Ellie, with the whole revenge plot, and the length she goes to try to fulfill that desire. I honestly couldn't say that I wouldn't do that if it was within my power, if I was in that situation. I mean, there's something to be said about how it really portrays really well, I think, how there you can process trauma in many different ways. I know that I personally, with some life experience of mine, I went more of the depressive side, but I also know that during all of it, all I wished was that I even had a dream, I remember. It stuck with me since then. Of somebody was in the dream with me. I was yelling at them. I was basically screaming at them and shaking them, telling them that I didn't want to be sad anymore. I just wanted to be angry, so I didn't have to be sad. And I think that is essentially what's going on with Ellie here. In order to avoid having to confront that part of the grief, I guess, she instead turns to anger. And so throughout the portion where you're playing as her, you see that she gets a lot quieter through your time playing, as well as she kind of emotionally gets more distant with characters like Dina. And it comes back a little bit when they are about to leave, when they're in the theater in Seattle and they're about to leave. Jesse, Tommy, Ellie, and Dina. She's kind of getting a grasp again. She knows that in order to help another person, she needs to put aside this anger. But then, amongst other things that occurred, when we get back to the farmhouse, or I guess to the farmhouse for the first time, we see that even though she kind of lives a quaint life on the farm, which I know everybody wished could just continue, and that was the final bit. She then has to deal with the depressive side of things. So she has PTSD. She is experiencing panic attacks. She is not actually moving forward yet. She's still stuck in that state of grief. And so I think it kind of demonstrates how it really is a long journey to get through any traumatic experience, whether it be simply losing a loved one in a relatively mundane situation to one that's more extreme, or having to deal with past trauma. There's a lot to suggest, both in the first and second game, that Ellie deals with a lot of survivor's guilt when it comes to Riley, who, if you played the, I guess either the first game or the DLC, because I believe it's mentioned in both. Both she and Ellie had gotten bit, but only Ellie had survived. She was the one that was immune, and so she has watched a lot of people around her, who she has cared for, die because of this virus, and she was unable to do anything. And this is only made worse when, in some of the flashbacks in Part 2, we see that she found out the truth about the Fireflies and what happened with Joel in the hospital. Essentially, she was going to be killed in order to try and make a new vaccine. And Joel ended up killing everybody there, or almost everybody, I guess, it turns out, in order to save Ellie's life without her, consent, because she was unconscious at the time. They were prepping her for surgery. And this surgery, she didn't know either that she was going to be killed, but when she finds out, she begins, and Joel confirmed that she begins breaking down. And so that trauma also manifests in a lot of Ellie's distance with Joel. And obviously that's more directed at a specific person, but I'd say that could easily influence the way that she treats others around her, such as Dina and Jesse. And going back even further in terms of past trauma, you have David from the first game. So with David, she had been basically kidnapped and watched as they prepared bodies for cannibalism. And I know that from interviews and from behind the scenes stuff when it comes to developers, writers, actors, everything, with David and Ellie, their interactions. And so if you know the game, you immediately know what I mean. Whether or not there was a sexual aspect to it, at least on David's side. I know that Nolan North, who plays David, didn't play it with that in mind. He didn't mean not that he didn't mean, but he didn't feel that David was trying to have any sexual interaction. But I know that in, I think, just only like one or two interviews, it was really discussed with Ashley Johnson, who was playing Ellie, that she essentially got that vibe from it. That's how she read it. And Neil Druckmann, he's kind of, from what I can tell, gone back and forth about his answer. I think it's in part just because it is meant to be left up for interpretation, to a degree. But anything, even if it's not, doesn't have that sexual element, it still is extremely tough situation for a 14-year-old to be in. She almost gets murdered. She gets chased down in a burning building with basically no way out. She is faced with death constantly. she watched a guy chop up another person's body, getting ready to eat it, or well, getting ready to cook it, I guess. She had to deal with, before that, she had to deal with Joel being impaled and trying to handle everything herself now, including his health during winter, which, mind you, is not the easiest thing, especially, there are no working hospitals around. And so, with all of that mixed together, when you get to the spring chapter, which it follows directly after Joel saves Ellie, not saves, but finds Ellie. Ellie ends up killing David, quite brutally. You see that she's, and even Joel comments on it in the game, that she's a lot quieter. You don't get as many dialogue prompts. You don't get as many little comments or jokes or anything. Even as a player, you notice it almost immediately and are concerned. I mean, obviously. And so, while this part of the trauma and things, they might not carry over or directly apply to part 2 and her actions and things, but I think it illustrates just how everything in your life can affect how you act. I don't know if that's even what the conclusion I was starting with, but that's the conclusion I ended with. So you know what? That's what I'm going with. And I mean, even if you haven't experienced something that involves similar either circumstances or emotions as that, I think that it still allows you to better understand how trauma works and how it affects you. And we also kind of see that when it comes to Abby. Now, again, I know Abby's a controversial character. And also, a real quick tangent, people who sent death threats to Laura Bailey, who plays Abby, and death threats to her son, who was a baby at the time, I'm sorry, you're scum of the earth. Like, come on. It's a fictional character who killed another fictional character. You are angry at the character. Don't be angry at the person playing them. She did her job of embodying a character. And especially don't threaten her life or her child's life. I mean, come on. It's ridiculous. But back on topic with Abby. With the whole death of her father, obviously she went out and began her hunt for Joel. She was searching for him. You see in all of her flashbacks, she mentions him at least once, looking for him. And then eventually finds him, kills him, and you see that even after that, she still has nightmares of the sequence where you run through the hospital hallway and you see her father's dead body. And the thing you see at the end of the hallway changes throughout the story, but the fact that she still experiences that hallway at all is definitely an indicator that while she may have killed the person whose action was the source of her trauma, it is not yet gone. And also, side note, I want to say that it is the sound design with the alarm that goes off in that hallway is so well done, and I think that everyone, as soon as they heard that siren going off, even without playing the first game in a long time, you immediately knew what was happening. You immediately recognized it. So kudos to the sound designers and the musicians. I guess more sound designers on this case. But yeah, so we see that with Abby, and with her, the trauma ends up almost being more her I guess way of working through it ends up almost more constructively, or being more constructive. And I don't think this isn't to say that she had an active part in it. She didn't directly cause it to be more constructive or healthy. Because I mean, obviously, her killing Joel was not healthy or constructive in the least. I mean, that was just not a good thing to have done. But unlike Ellie, I think that she had gone past her phase of pure hatred driving her. Even in the flashbacks, you see that hatred isn't 100% of the time like only talking about Joel. She has all these people around her. She has Owen. She has Mel. Well, I mean, she wasn't really friends with Mel. She has Owen. She has, later on, Manny. She has all of these people who can kind of act as the scaffolding for what can then later become a more, can be a situation where she can move on. Again, not actively it being within her control. It's more of her having a situation, having people surrounding her that can help expedite the process and make it a bit smoother, which Ellie lacks. Yes, she has Dina when they're in Seattle, and everything, but there is a lot of time where she doesn't, and this wound is a lot fresher. She was the only one there when it happened as well, unlike Abby, who wasn't in the room when it exactly occurred, but also there were other Fireflies, who are the group she was part of, who were there with her, essentially. So there's a huge difference, and this can be applied to like real life situations. Again, it's not just somebody writing this up. This is based on how people really work. At least when a writer's doing a good job. And so again, it without beating it over your head, the game is able to engage you with these ideas and have you kind of thinking about it. And so, I mean, I know a lot of people don't understand things like depression, whether it causes you to act in a depressive manner or in more irritable, fractious manner. And so I think that things like this, in the same way that it can help people who either don't agree with or understand queerness, to open their minds and ears to even beginning to listen. I think that the same can be said here for people who either trivialize trauma or trivialize things like depression and mental health, and kind of get them to think about it in more depth. So, yeah, I mean, I guess generally my whole point is that games can do a lot to help with getting people to relate to one another. That's really the main gist of things, I guess. I guess I'll just add some random things about the game that's not as serious. We'll end on a lighter note. Okay, so first off, I love the gameplay. It feels so smooth. I love dodging in it. It's so nice. Whenever I go back to play the first now, and I can't dodge, I immediately get like frustrated. But then obviously I'm like, oh, this game is from 2013. But that, the music, Guillermo Salvatore, he's still so good. And I know that he is going to be composing music for the HBO series, so that's going to be really nice. It's interesting, you can see some interviews with him, and he talks about using untuned or I guess distuned instruments, especially strings, So things, any string instrument, including guitars. So he purposefully makes it so it's not tuned to the typical, to any, I guess, typical scale, whether that be like within the concert scales or jazz ones or things like that. And it creates a really interesting sound. What else? I mean, the acting is always stellar. The scene where Joel dies, it definitely, like, you feel everything in that scene, as well as many other scenes. Oh god, that's not really going lighter. Um, let's see. What else? I do really like. I know I've talked to my brother about this game a lot because we both played it during quarantine, and then we're both just fans of the Last of Us. He wasn't as big of a fan of the Seattle portion where it's the dome and the courthouse and things, because he found it kind of boring and like, I mean I enjoyed it. I wish it was a bit bigger, so it didn't feel as much like you're kind of confined to a play box, you know. But I did enjoy the gameplay there and kind of just exploring around. It felt almost like when in the first game when you're exploring different towns and you can go through all the buildings and things, though there it's a little bit more natural. Same with the second game. It's a little more natural that the area is small and you can kind of feel where the barriers are, the invisible barriers, but they make more sense because, you know, it's a tight road. You're in a suburb outside of a city, or you're just in a suburb, period. But when you have that Seattle portion, it's a wide open space. You have some buildings that are like crumbling, but it feels a little too confined. What else? Rip Shimmer was a good horse. Died too soon. So that was. I was not expecting that. I was not expecting that at all. When I first played it, I for a second thought I had missed one of those like claymore things with the wires, but apparently not. I thought I had fucked up. I mean, I could go on like gushing about these games, but I mean, I kind of addressed what I wanted to address, so I guess I'll end this here, because I don't. Trying to get back to a lighter note is kind of hard, with this game, especially if I'm talking about the second rather than the first. But yeah, I mean, I encourage everyone to play those games, as well as if you haven't played Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, you definitely should. You gotta play it with headphones because the way that they have it set up is called binaural audio, I want to say. So it is very much dependent on having separate speakers for each of your ears for voice placement and things like that. But the way that they do it, it really does sound as though these voices are essentially coming from inside your head or right next to you when you know nothing is there. And I mean, that game, it is more story focused than gameplay. I know some of my friends aren't as into the combat. I enjoyed the combat well enough, but it's not super long. Really well done, really well acted. The actress who plays Senua was actually I don't think she's not a game developer. I think she's an art. She works on the art of games. But she was a stand-in for just a little bit, and then they saw her acting and kept her as the main character, and she's super good in it. Apparently, she has experienced. Oh, what's the name? I still can't remember the name of the the hallucinations that aren't psychosis. That's what it is, psychosis. So she has experienced psychosis apparently in the past, and so that is that definitely lended to how she performed the character. But the music is really good. Yeah, I definitely recommend that game. You can get it on PC or on consoles. It's pretty cheap now, I think. And yeah, I guess that's the end of my ramble here. How long? We got past an hour. Damn. Okay. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, I hope this wasn't boring or anything. This one had a little bit more structure to it, thank God, than the last one. But yeah, I hope everyone had a good time listening. Thank you for joining us and tuning in. You can listen to this again on rss.com, or you can listen to us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, all of those good ones. And you can also find us at our website and listen there at www.queerlyapodcast.com. You can find us on Twitter at queerly_podcast, and leave us any comments. You can always give us topic suggestions or just general opinions, either on quality of the podcast, audio-wise, topic-wise, anything, as well as suggest questions to discuss on here. We have a list of future possible topics, and on those, some specific films, games, books are listed. So if you have one that you think would really apply well to one of the topics, or you think that something's missing from that list, then of course just let us know. We have a little contact form on the website. And yeah, so I hope to see y'all soon again. Oh God, my English is dying. Okay, I should end here. Hope y'all have good days, and I will see you again soon, and Liz will be back for the next episode. Alright.